Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our webcast with SymphonyAM. Before we start, I just wanted to let all of our attendees know if it's possible to mute your microphones so that we have less background noise. And if you if you're logging into your camera, to turn the webcam off. That way it'll be a more seamless experience for all of us. So again, thank you everyone for coming. My name is Tusef Mirza. I'm from the Advertising Research Foundation. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. We're going to wait a couple of more minutes, about 3-4 minutes, just to get more people to jump in, and then we can get started. Hello again. This is Tusef. For the new attendees that have just joined, this is today's webcast with SymphonyAM, and I'm going to start just in about a minute or so. We have a good group of people that are joining us. I wanted to remind everybody to mute your microphones if it's possible, and if you're logged in through a computer, to turn off your microphone, or if you have your webcam on, to turn it off. So I think we can go ahead and start. So again, my name is Tusef Mirza. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of the Advertising Research Foundation. Thank you everyone for joining us. I'm going to be your moderator today. And before I begin, I just wanted to go through a couple of housekeeping items. But before, I just want to introduce the title of what we're going to be talking about, which is Broadcast, Cable, and SVOD Development through an L+35 Rating Lens. And your presenters today from SymphonyAM is going to be Charlie Buchwalter, the President and CEO, John Sollecito, SVP Client Solutions, and Kerrilyn Curtin, VP of Client Solutions. So in terms of the housekeeping, the audio is going to be streamed. This means that you're basically going to be able to hear us through your computer speakers. However, if you prefer to use the teleconference option, we could try to post that on the chat box. Okay. Should you have any questions during the session, please send them to me using the chat box. And what we're actually going to do, if you have any questions for the presentation, for the actual content, we're going to look at those at the end of the presentation, and we could address some of the questions during the Q&A session. This session is going to be recorded also, so if you'd like to view the recorded event, it's going to be available on our site in about 2 weeks from now, and you can view it at your convenience. And we are also going to be extending this conversation on social media. So if you'd like to join us, you could use the hashtag ARF Webcast to also engage with us that way. So we wanted to just relay to you a couple of the events that we're going to have for the Advertising Research Foundation. I wanted to just highlight a couple of them. The Leadership Lab will be back for our summer session starting July 14th, and that's going to be run through September 8th. The topic for this course is going to be centered around cross-platform measurement, and you can get all that information through our website if you're interested and want to register. And also, we're going to be debuting a new series of events this summer called Deep Dives that really focuses on specific topics of interest for the industry. And these ones are also going to be coming up, so you can stay tuned through our website. So now that we've gone through all of the housekeeping and given you a little bit of insight in terms of what we're doing at the ARF, I'm going to pass this on to Charlie Buchwalter for him to start the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tusef. I want to thank the ARF for sponsoring this webcast. We really appreciate it. They have just a great selection of offerings like this. And I also want to thank everyone for joining today. I know everyone's schedule is totally packed, especially with the long weekend coming up. So we really appreciate you taking a few minutes. What we're going to cover today is I'm going to spend a few minutes up front talking a little bit about our technology and then the vision of what our Video Pulse service is capable of, what kind of progress we've made as a company, a little bit about our methodology. But I think what you really came to learn about was really the findings that we're having and some of the interesting insights on what's happening across broadcast, cable, and SVOD programming as you extend out the viewership across platforms. We're just seeing some fascinating things. And I would say one of the more interesting things is these are developments that are changing slowly on a month-to-month and quarter-to-quarter basis. You know, this ecosystem is changing so dramatically, and we feel fortunate that we have a technology that allows us to kind of keep abreast of some of these changes. So these are the kinds of things we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to just jump in and talk just a minute or so about the technology that we have. We are part of a marketplace that has some measurement companies that have been doing what they've been doing for quite some time. With the meteoric changes in how consumers are consuming media across platform, across devices, our company has felt that there is a need in the marketplace to generate an innovative, nimble, new technology to keep abreast of those trends. So we have accomplished and created a app-based, mobile-based technology that has the ability of tracking how an individual is viewing TV and video, what they're doing on mobile, what they're doing on social, what they're doing online, all in an app that works in the background on a mobile device. We do this through a panel, a mobile device panel that we have built. It is currently at around 15,000 participants. It is absolutely growing, and we're working very, very diligently to kind of ensure that it is fully representative of the U.S. population. We're working with a number of third-party players to kind of extend the data that we have. And I think the thing that we're kind of most pleased about and our clients are most pleased about is how the underlying technology is quite scalable. And all of the data that's being generated from this technology is showing up in a subscription self-serve service that a growing list of media companies are using. A couple of things on this slide that I'll point out is on the far right, you can see that in addition to how this behavioral technology works, we have a survey-based capability that's built into it as well. And so when people want to do things like advertising and sponsorship effectiveness studies and understand the impact of different media stimuli, you know, we have the ability of sending surveys based on the behavioral response. So we don't need to ask people, did you see this ad or this program, because our technology knows that. So we can skip all that and go directly to some of the sales funnel questions to understand what the impact of a particular campaign has been. You'll also see the geolocation. This is a really interesting thing, and we're finding more and more opportunities for this. If you think about it, one of the real great things about our technology is we can understand, you know, people's media exposure when they're out of home. or when they're in an auto showroom, or when they're in a parking lot of Target. And so the idea is that if we know when someone receives a media stimuli, we understand where they go and what the timing is between when they see an ad or a campaign and where they go. And all of these capabilities, in a sense, are included in this technology, which is downloaded to our panelists' mobile devices. Now, through 2015, this whole journey for us really started in early 2015, about 15 months ago, when we met with all of the major media companies, many agencies, and a handful of leading advertisers to ask them, what are your points of pain when it comes to this whole area of keeping track of media measurement? And these are the three things that we heard. People consistently wanted to understand what is the evolution of the TV viewer. You know, the kind of knee-jerk reaction is TV audiences are shrinking. And the question is, well, given how they can see media across more platforms and across time, is that really true? And what are the facts there? What are the impact of streaming services? I mean, I don't have to tell any of you how this is transforming the industry, but there's been very, very little information in terms of understanding on an apples-to-apples basis how they're performing. And then the question is, what about monetizing across all TV viewing? Many media companies are somewhat challenged these days because when you go beyond the currency and you have more and more viewership beyond the currency, the challenge of monetizing that is very, very great, and there's a yearning to have more KPIs, metrics, and ultimately currencies to be able to help track that. So this is really what we've been up to. Now, we launched our service in September of last year, and one of the things we did upon launching the service, you know, given that we were the new kids on the block, and I think while there was a lot of enthusiasm and excitement about what our technology was capable of doing, there was still a sense of, well, look, we have to see the data, we have to suss it out, we have to compare it to other sources that we're used to, we need to become comfortable with it. So as opposed to kind of moving quickly to signing a lot of people up, we went a different route, and we chose 7 companies, 3 broadcast networks, 3 cable networks, and 1 TV studio to come on board on a pilot basis. And it was a phenomenal process. Each of these pilot participants have become tremendously valued partners of ours. They took it very seriously. They put many of their staff members on it to really kick the tires, to see what they liked, to share what they didn't like, to urge us to move in certain directions that they felt they had to see if they were going to get value out of it. And these are the kinds of things on this slide that we actually really were groping with, you know, as we kind of refined the product and put it together. You know, the whole issue is you're laying the groundwork for KPIs for delayed viewing. So when we talk about L+35, that is truly all about viewing beyond the current currency going out a trailing 5 weeks. And that has been the cornerstone, I think, of some of our unique offerings. The idea of tracking streaming originals, I mean, this has been increasingly a very big thing for us, and I think it's safe to say that we are really the only company right now that is coming up with apples-to-apples measurement for streaming originals. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The idea of unifying cross-media metrics, key thing, the viewer path on this slide, I would say is probably one of the most innovative and important things people are asking about. When so many people are saying that TV is dead and cord cutting is the future, the numbers we're seeing are considerably more nuanced. And what people are really interested in is that if people are watching previous seasons on Netflix, what % of those people actually watch live? And what is the interplay between linear and nonlinear platforms? And how does that interplay vary by different consumer segments? If there is a sweet spot of what we're focusing on, that is really it. And there is just so much more work to be done in that area. And it's something that I think we're very excited about. So just very, very quickly, this is the way the system works. I mean, I think if a panelist watches TV, basically what we tell them is to have your smartphone or your mobile device near you and have it be on. That is the only thing we tell them. Once they watch the TV, much of the content that's seen is tracked through an audio tracking capability. So each program episode has a fingerprint associated with it. Our technology has the ability to take that audio code and match it to a reference database. So on a close to real-time basis, we know exactly what people are watching. And we are able to do this across, broadcast, cable, and this is, of course, how we get Netflix and Amazon content as well. And as we go through this process, this is the manner in which we're able to come up with our concept of a total audience measurement across all these programs. Now, one thing I should say right now is we aren't 100% dependent on this listening capability to track if people are on portable devices and they're streaming on a website or whatever. We have a partnership with Comscore that there's very valuable data that's we're sharing with them and they're sharing with us, and that gives us the ability to, with our entire panel, do a match with their census network to understand what is the full scope of what people are doing on the digital side of things for video viewing, et cetera, et cetera. Now, unless anyone is wondering, we of course don't have access willy-nilly to that entire census network. We do need to get each of our clients to give permission to Comscore, allowing Comscore to share their data with us. So we do go through that process, and over time we've assembled a very nice library of companies that are sharing this data with us. So very quickly, I just have another slide or two, and then I'll be turning things over to John and Kerrilyn. The way that we track our content really comes in 3 tiers of information. Now, where we got started is we have a partner that has access to 210 national channels, and so all of the Live plus 7 programming they have. So that's how we got started. Now, what we then did is we worked with them to establish a subset of that library to go out 35 days. Now, obviously, we can't ingest the programming for everything on all channels, so we've worked with all of our clients to come up with, look, tell us, in your view, what are the 10 to 20 most important shows that you want us to track out 35 days. And so we've built up a very, very nice library of companies that are in this tier 2. Now, tier 3 allows us to go into streaming originals and off-air programs as well. And so as soon as a streaming original comes on board, we have a heads up on that, and our partner is able to generate the audio fingerprint code for those, which allows us, from the time these things go live, to be able to track how people are viewing them as well. So I think that we feel that while there is obviously a lot of great data on Live 7, the process of getting to a comprehensive view of L+35 has taken quite a bit of investment on our part and a lot of hard work, but we're feeling really great about the progress that we've made there. I think that many of you have probably seen us in the press increasingly. When we launched in September, the Adweek article in the upper left highlighting some of our insights on the millennials, I think was quite well read. On the top right, this actually happened in mid-January of this year, where one of our pioneering first clients was at the TCA and shared some of our data on what did we see in the fall season for Netflix and other streaming originals. And this really caught the industry by storm because it was the first time they've seen this information. And then in the last few weeks, we're getting more and more data out of what happened throughout the second quarter and the articles in Variety, IBT, and the Rep. So with that, I would like to turn things over to my colleagues, John Sollecito and Kerrilyn Curtin, who are actually going to dive into the data and show you what we're seeing. And we'll look forward to getting some of your questions, and I'll come in at the very end and we'll wrap things up. So, John, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Charlie. So, good afternoon, everyone. Kerrilyn and myself will actually be co-presenting these. I'll basically be doing a lot of the play-by-play, and Kerrilyn will be adding a lot of the color. So just jumping into it, the first thing we want to talk about is, why is it important for the data that we're, why is our data important, and why is it important that we're doing what we're doing? I mean, as Charlie was talking about early on, there's a lot going on in our industry in terms of video viewership. Everybody on the phone, I think, would agree that it's an exciting time, and consumer behavior is changing, and it's changing rather quickly. But one thing that we're finding from our data, and we'll have a slide to share about this in a second, is that when you look at the viewership outside the currency, so Charlie mentioned that earlier, and just for clarification, when we say viewership outside the currency, what we mean is looking at viewership on VOD greater than 3 days, DVR greater than 7 days, and over-the-top viewership. So throughout this presentation, when we refer to outside the currency, that's what we're referring to. And we're seeing that is increasing for all demographics. And the linear TV content is remaining alive and well right now. And the technology is moving very quickly, but the solution that we have put in place actually keeps pace with that. And some of the things that we'll touch on later in the deck is looking at streaming originals. And we thought a few months ago we had a handle on what streaming originals were doing and the type of viewership, and then all of a sudden things like Fuller House and Making a Murderer come along and change the landscapes overnight. So really interesting stuff. And also we're finding that current measurement solutions out there are missing upwards of 50+% of a program's viewership. In just one quarter's time, we saw at least a 15% increase in viewership outside the currency across all demographics. So taking a look into that stat in particular, when we looked from Q4 to Q1 2016, if you look at all of these demo breaks here, 18 to 24, all the way up to 45 to 54, we're seeing that, there's pretty significant movement. So 18 to 24-year-olds currently or in Q1, we're spending 40% of their time, or 40% of their viewership was outside the current currency, and that was up 18% versus Q4. But then if you look at even the older demo, the 45 to 54s, they've increased 22%. So we're seeing this trend, increase consistently across all demographics. If we took a deeper dive just looking at broadcast, and we looked at the broadcast networks, and we found that on average, about 33 or 30% of the viewership across the broadcast channels is happening outside the currency. What's interesting is when you look at the CW and Fox, they tend to over-index against that norm, and this is, we can say it's related to the younger viewership of those networks. And you'll see that CBS sort of trails behind, but a lot of that has to do with them not exposing a lot of their content on a lot of these over-the-top platforms. So when you look at the chart to the right, and here what we highlighted was Hulu, and the broadcast norm is when we looked at the viewing outside of the currency, in particular on OTT and VOD, almost 50% of that viewing is happening on Hulu. And this makes sense when you're talking specifically about broadcast, because a lot of the broadcast networks are exposing their content on the Hulu platform, with the exception of CBS. And you'll see that there's no viewership for Hulu on CBS because they're not on that platform. So moving ahead, when we look at the younger viewers, they're aggressively turning away from broadcast, more so than the older demographic. So, as we mentioned before, 40% of the 18 to 24's viewership is happening outside the currency, and you'll see that as the age increases, the reliance on live viewing increases as well. But as we said before, even the 45 to 54s spending about 40% of their time in live viewing. We're seeing that erode over time, and that number is actually going down, and their viewership outside the currency continues to grow. Here's just sort of a snapshot of when we examine outside the currency and look at the components that make that up. If you want to see what programs or broadcast programs are performing well in those particular buckets, you'll see that The Big Bang Theory has the highest rating outside the currency with almost a 2.7 rating. And then their total live 35 rating is nearly a 9. And you can see that 31% of The Big Bang Theory's viewership is happening outside the currency. And then the other components here just show like who's leading with DVR viewership outside of 7 days, and that would be Modern Family. And then interestingly, when you look at the OTT platform, The Flash has almost a 2 rating on OTT platforms. Very interesting stuff. And I think that, The Flash, too, can speak to a younger audience, and we're finding generally that younger audiences are using the over-the-top platforms in a bigger way.
I hear that I'm seeing that some people are having problem viewing some of the content, specifically that L+35 for Big Bang Theory is an 8.59 for those of you that cannot see it. I know John mentioned that, so I think it's just a good number to point out that after 35 days, Big Bang was actually an 8.59 average.
Is there a problem with the slides, or there's something blocking it?
It does seem like for many people there is a gray bar, a gray rectangle, kind of partway down the screen that is blocking some. I'm not exactly sure what's going on. Maybe the ARF people can look into it while we continue.
That's weird. So I actually could see another monitor here, and I could see that gray bar. So when I see it covering something, I'll be sure to call out what it's covering.
Yeah, we apologize for that, but hopefully it'll get fixed as we move on.
So if you look at the broadcast programs in particular and the percentage of their viewership that's happening outside the currency, as mentioned earlier, the CW and Fox really do dominate in this area. So the first two programs from the CW have more than 50% of their viewership currently happening outside the currency, and that's Jane the Virgin and Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. But as you see throughout the top here, it's really dominated by Fox programs and CW. The only real other one that pops up in the top is Undateable, and once again, that's a fairly young skewing show, and makes sense that they'd have a significant amount of their viewership happening outside the currency. It's weird. I'm trying. Okay. So consistent with broadcast, if we change gears now and we look at live cable viewing, we'll see that it's the same story. 35% of 18 to 24-year-olds viewership is happening outside the currency, and you'll see that it's pretty significant for the younger demos and trails off a little bit for the older demos, although they do have quite a bit of viewership outside the currency. But what's really interesting here is that when we look at where's that viewing happening outside the currency, in particular to cable programs, we see a big chunk of it happening on VOD platforms. And one thing that we have found is that there seems to be a trend of folks using VOD platforms as their DVR device. And I know a lot of us, do that. And I can't hear everybody on the phone, but I'm sure some of you are like, yeah, I do that. But, a lot of people in order to try to save some space on the DVRs are tuning to VOD and watching, previous episodes that way. And we're seeing that trend across all demos, that a big significant portion of the outside currency viewership happening, particularly on cable programs, is on that VOD platform. So similar to how we looked at the broadcast programs, when we take a deep dive into cable programs, we see that The Walking Dead is that winner for the outside currency and the total L+35 rating. But you will notice the L+35 rating that's being blocked for The Walking Dead is 6.43, and you'll see that it's lower than the broadcast, the Big Bang Theory, but it's still significant. And 26% of Walking Dead's total viewership is happening outside the current currency. It's also leading in over the top with over a 1 rating there as well. Here's a list of just the cable programs with the highest outside currency is the ranking here, and you'll see Better Call Saul is the one that's at 45%. But what we found, like overall, when we compare to broadcast, the top programs have a lower percentage of outside currency than you'd see on broadcast. And a lot of this is likely driven by these programs having less availability on the OTT platforms. Hulu plays a big part in the viewership for broadcast, and you'll see, and as we've shown in previous slides, there's a huge amount of viewership happening on the Hulu platform for broadcast. But it's interesting, and it's not, to be diminished, but you still have the top cable programs here having nearly 50% of viewership outside the currency, but it's not as high as what we've seen for broadcast. I think on the bottom, Talking Dead is covered, and The Curse of Oak Island, and that's 9% and 3% respectively. So looking at streaming originals, as Charlie mentioned, we are probably the only one out there right now that is able to look at ratings for streaming originals on Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, and the like. And here we're just showing what the top streaming originals have been, and you'll see that it's dominated by Netflix. Fuller House has been at the top for quite some time, with Making a Murderer coming in second. But what's really interesting here, and just turn your attention to the graph, the line graph to the right. What we typically find is that streaming originals tend to get a lot of their viewership up front, and then it trails off. I mean, one of that being that folks will come in and binge watch an entire season because the entire season is available on the platform on release date. But what we found with Making a Murderer was was sort of an anomaly, where Making a Murderer, when it first launched or was first released, it didn't have a lot of traction at all, and you could see that the rating was less than a 0.5. But what happened in the few weeks after it was released, it was leading into the holidays. There was a lot of press buzz around Making a Murderer, and you can see that it really peaked in week 4. And then, it sort of had that same pattern where a lot of the peak usage or the peak reach is happening in a very short time period, and then it trails off pretty quickly after that. Very interesting, and I don't know, Kerrilyn might want to add something here about Orange is the New Black Season 4, as we're just starting to get some of that data coming in as well.
So as John mentioned, Orange is the New Black. In looking at the initial L3 ratings, Fuller House continued to be number 1. But slowly, as the days are increasing, if you take a look at the L7, which isn't currently on this deck because we're looking at the L30, and you break it out by demo, it's interesting that Orange is the New Black Season 4 is creeping up very close to Full House, with the exception of the 25 to 34-year-old demo, where Fuller House is still number 1, which I think makes sense. Fuller House, if you look at that age break, it's really kind of the key demo of who grew up with that show throughout their childhood. So we'll see what happens as time increases. Another interesting thing that we see with our streaming originals is, as John mentioned, we have a big push in the very beginning, and the same thing goes by the episode level. If you start to look at the streaming original ratings on the episode level, there's a pretty big jump in the beginning, and then they slowly, as the episodes go on, decrease. With Fuller House in particular, it was very apparent that happened. There was a large rating for that E1, and by E13 it dropped off pretty dramatically. But with all the other streaming originals, it's more of a steady decline. So it's kind of interesting if you just take a look at the way the different programs were put out there and the content that's in the different episodes. So it's kind of interesting to follow along episode to episode as well, which you're able to do on our system.
Hey, Kerrilyn, I want to just ask a clarifying question. I'm thinking that people on the phone may be wondering this. The commentary that you just had, you weren't actually referring to a slide. You were actually just kind of sharing some insights that we know about and have gleaned, but there's not a slide that you were speaking from, correct?
Correct.
Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure everyone knew that. I think that, as you can tell, there's much more data that we have access to, and we just couldn't include everything in slides here, but I think Kerrilyn's points there really are fascinating. But John, why don't you take it, or John or Kerrilyn, move ahead.
Sure. So looking at the next slide, this is throwing everything together. So when we looked at streaming originals and throw broadcast and cable programs in there as well, you can see that streaming originals do compete quite well with broadcast and cable programs. The ranking or chart to the left is streaming originals versus broadcast, and you'll see, and the one to the right is the streaming originals versus cable. And you will notice here that Fuller House is at the top for both. But it's pretty interesting to see that a lot of these shows, the streaming originals, are competing with the viewership that we're seeing on broadcast and cable programs. So moving forward, I mean, a lot of the data that we and Charlie just sort of segued into was that the findings that we just shared with you guys is really just the tip of the iceberg of what we're collecting. We could get a lot deeper, and we have been, looking at streaming originals and trying to uncover patterns and, do the streaming originals do they all show sort of the same pattern in terms of release, or are there anomalies? And we've seen that with Making a Murderer, but are they going to, who's the next Making a Murderer to pop up? And, Kerrilyn right now is looking very hard at Orange is the New Black and trying to compare to what we've seen with the previous season and how those trends are emerging. What we're also doing is the solution that we have with the data that we just showed, we're applying that to commercials, and we will have a new product coming out in the near future called Ad Pulse. So we'll be able to, look at commercials and ads on different platforms and look at the effectiveness of those, and also track promos and do promos. Are they effective in driving folks to tune in for a particular show? Or if there are promos on other platforms, do they drive viewers back to live or to other platforms? That's all enhancements that we have coming up. We do have a pretty deep database, and we're doing a lot of customized looks at the data right now. We're looking at segmentation analyses. So if there's a particular segment that one of our clients wants to look at, we can dig deeper. We actually did a presentation pretty recently looking at folks that we called digital first. So those who turn to digital platforms first, how does their viewership on live or cable and other platforms, does that differ at all from folks who tune in live? And just really interesting findings coming out across the board. So hope that what we shared with you today sort of gives you pretty good insight to what we're collecting and some of the data that is starting to come out from the organization. As Charlie mentioned, we're still fairly new, and we're learning as well as we move on and covering new tidbits in the data. But, it's just, like I said, because of the trends and viewership starting to be seen outside of the current currency, what we're collecting is very important to the industry and moving forward in terms of how video is going to be consumed now and in the future. So I guess with that, we'll open it up to any questions. I'm sure some have come through while we were speaking.
Kerrilyn, I am seeing a really, really excellent question here. And Kerrilyn, this you might be the best person to address it. So let me read it. The question is, in what we've shared today, are these numbers cum ratings, i.e. counting everyone that tuned in at any time for any length of time, or are these average ratings, i.e. AA at a point of time in the show?
So they're not cum. They're actually average audience ratings, similar to how Nielsen provides their ratings. So it's the average audience over a given minute is what we've provided. They're not cum numbers.
And I would also add that, just to clarify too, a lot of questions come about in terms of how we calculate our streaming original time shift ratings. It is the same way that live television or linear television is calculated. The only difference is that, being that Netflix, for example, releases all of their content on Friday evenings, that is considered the air date. So something like Fuller House, which premiered or was released February 26th, that is how the live time shift number is calculated from that 2/26 date. So it is very similar to linear television as well in that case.
Great. So a couple other questions here. One that just popped up is, are you coming to Canada? And the answer there is, one of the things that we are actually most bullish about with the way that our technology works is, unlike other approaches where you have to get a huge number of different services to cooperate on kind of a JIC country-by-country basis, what's kind of interesting about ours is this technology can easily be ported anywhere. Now, having said that, we've made a very key focus to let's get it right and really make headway in the U.S. So our current roadmap, which is certainly probably through the middle part of 2017, for the next, let's say, 9 to 12 months, is really to keep getting this in front of more and more of the broadcast, cable, digital publishers, studios, and really lick it correctly here in the U.S. We do have we've been approached and have had good discussions with some of the leading agencies and measurement firms in Canada. We've had discussions with other partners that would take us to Europe and to APAC. But I think that from our standpoint as a startup looking to the future, we're going to put those a little bit farther down the road, but it's entirely feasible. Now, there was another question earlier on. I think someone made it, which come in a little bit late. There was a question about how large our panel is. The panel is 15,000 right now. We're very proud. We're not aware of another mobile device panel that has a single source passive technology like ours does. People do say, how is the panel going to grow? And the answer is absolutely yes. We have some new partners on board that are really helping us to kind of find more efficient and powerful ways to kind of grow the panel. I would say the most important thing for us is to ensure that the panel is fully representative, because everyone that works with us wants to really be certain that their audiences are being fairly represented by a syndicated service like this. I would say that some of the challenges that you ordinarily have with a panel like ours is out of the blocks early on. It tends to skew younger people, it tends to skew female, and it tends to skew, well, and I think that it's getting older demos as well as high-income demos, it is just a challenge. So our entire focus right now is to partner with companies that really are allowing us to kind of close those gaps very quickly. And we are on a path right now that we're just making some excellent headway on that. So we're very, very encouraged by that. So let's see. Okay, another question. Does the Hulu viewing included here incorporate both the regular Hulu and the Hulu ads-free offering? I'm guessing no, but want to confirm. You are correct. At this point in time, if you think about how the technology works, whether we are seeing programming from an ACR or an audio ability, or if we are tracking it through the digital approach through our extended matched panel, there is no ability at this time to differentiate. I mean, at this particular point in time, the only way we really think we could do that is to add a survey or engage with some of the panelists to ask. Certainly not an ideal approach, but I think at this point in time, the biggest question that people have is really just the role that Hulu's playing and how it's growing, et cetera. We will be looking much more closely on that, because we do understand that the no ad offering from Hulu is definitely gaining some solid traction. So listen, I think with that, well, let me just see. I just saw another question that came through. Does the collection method of the mobile panel create a bias in terms of the individuals who are willing to participate, i.e. fear of privacy or tech-savvy individuals? I think it's an excellent question. I think this is something we are very, very conscious of. I think that as we have now been in this business in terms of recruiting with alternative methods for now going on 4 years, I think that we have gotten to the point that we know that there are always going to be some sources of biases, but we think that these particular biases that are mentioned here that you asked about are actually minimal relative to the bias of some of the bigger biases about age and income. So listen, I think with that, Seth, I think I'm going to turn it back to you. What I would like to kind of let everyone know on the phone that we just really appreciate your attention today. That this deck, as Seth mentioned, it will be available in a couple of weeks. Please reach out to us. You can go to our website, which is SymphonyAM.com. You can easily get us there. You can reach us at info@SymphonyAM.com to send any questions. We'd be certainly more than happy to follow up with any of you to explain more about how we do what we do and how we may be able to address some of your issues. So with that, John and Kerrilyn, thanks so much for your contribution. And to Seth, it's back to you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Charlie, John, and Kerrilyn, for a great presentation on what you've been working on. And thank you for everybody who's also participated and that have given us questions to ponder about. And like Charlie said, we will be posting the session recorded on site at the ARF. So if there's anything that was missed, you can definitely go back and connect with us that way. So with that, I would invite everybody to come back and see us for another webcast that could be coming up or for one of our events. And if you need any information, you can reach out directly to me. My name is Tousef. That's T-O-U-S-E-E-F, period Mirza, M-I-R-Z-A, at thearf.org. So with that, thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.